Hello friends! So unfortunately this is not going to be a typical JJ video. Like many people around the world, I've had my life a little bit disrupted by the coronavirus situation, so I thought I would just make a little update video explaining to you some of the details about that. I am just sort of ad-libbing my way through this, so be patient with me. So anyway, as you guys know, I like to travel a lot, and a couple of days ago I went down to California. My parents spend a lot of time in California because they are quite old and retired and they like to hang out in Palm Springs, and they said, oh, you should come and visit us in Palm Springs, and so I did. Palm Springs is a very cool little city. I thought it would make some good video content. And then after I made my video about Palm Springs, I was thinking of going to LA, which is just a 2-hour drive away, and then maybe making a video about that as well. But unfortunately, no sooner had I arrived in Palm Springs then the coronavirus situation really seemed to escalate quite quickly. It seemed like suddenly all of the governments of the world were coming out with increasingly strict and severe warnings for the public on how to behave. And one of those warnings, one of the most consistent ones coming from all levels of government, was to keep non-essential travel to a bare minimum. And at that moment, it did occur to me that I was very clearly on non-essential travel. I started to feel guilty and self-conscious about what it would look like if I was making, a video in Palm Springs and LA and being like, oh, look at me, I'm JJ the YouTuber making a fun travel video. I do feel that in my own small way, I do have an obligation to model responsible behavior. And I felt like making a travel video was just not the responsible thing to be doing in this present environment. But I do have my own self-interest as well. At the time I was making this decision, President Trump was on the news and talked about how there was going to be this shutdown of travel coming from Europe to the US. And while I know it is extraordinarily unlikely that travel between the US and Canada would ever be shut down just because of how deeply, deeply integrated our countries and economies are, you do have to be sensitive to the fact that travel is just going to get more difficult, not easier, as the weeks go on. This story is evolving so quickly that I felt like it could no longer be taken for granted that I would have an easy time leaving LA within even like a week from now. And so I just made the decision that I should really just come home right away. So I left like less than 48 hours after arriving. And as I was coming home on Thursday, the government of British Columbia, which is the province of Canada I live in, put out a decree saying that not only should there be no non-essential travel, but that anyone returning from travel from anywhere upon returning to the province should voluntarily self-isolate themselves for 2 weeks. So that very much applies to me. And so again, in order to model responsible behavior, to do the responsible thing, I'm going to comply with that and not go outside for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to stay here in my apartment and just tend to myself. British Columbia, much like Washington State in the US, has very much been a sort of epicenter of the coronavirus spread in North America. Per capita, I believe we have the highest number of confirmed cases of any part of Canada. The second highest number of confirmed cases overall, just behind Ontario. This is, I assume, because we have a very large population of people from China. I know that it's a little bit of a sensitive issue to talk about that sort of dimension of the problem, but it's not like some great character flaw that Chinese Canadians might be more susceptible to having the virus. It just means that, they have family in that part of the world and thus might have been more likely to travel there and thus been more likely to have brought it to, this part of the country. That's not some moral failing on their part. It's just a kind of unfortunate geographic reality. But anyway, beyond that, Canada is dealing with the virus in very much the same way everywhere else is. The Prime Minister's wife has apparently tested positive for it and is in some sort of isolation right now. The Prime Minister himself is also in a state of isolation, although he is not symptomatic, and I was watching his press conference earlier today and he says that he's not worried and has no plans to be tested. Beyond that, it is obviously a very quickly developing story and there's probably not much else I could say that could be of that much use. We're all watching the same news and following the same headlines. I'm very lucky that I have a job where I can work from home and thus being forced to stay home isn't really that big of an imposition. I can make my videos, I can do my writing or whatever else. Back a few weeks ago when they were saying that everybody should have at least 2 weeks of food in their home, I took that advice, and so now I'm pretty comfortable as far as that goes. But staying stuck in your building is also kind of boring. They shut down the gym, so I can't even exercise or anything. I'm a little bit concerned about my parents because they are still in Palm Springs. You know, they booked a long vacation there and are not really eager to leave prematurely. But at the same time, you know, my parents are quite old. They're both in their 70s, and that's the kind of demographic that we're supposed to be the most concerned about as it relates to infection and that sort of thing. But you know, having younger people like myself staying put is also a way that we can help older people like my parents. Because from what I understand, the issue with younger people is not so much that we would catch the virus and get sick and die from it, because that's not likely to happen to younger people, but more that we would carry the virus without really knowing about it and then spread it to older people within the community. So yeah, anyway, that's where I stand. I'd be curious to hear any stories about how the virus has impacted you guys. I'm also going to link in the thing below to a piece from The Atlantic magazine. It offers a very good guide to what they are now calling social distancing, which is basically the sort of behavior that I am trying to engage in. And they quote a number of medical professionals who offer pretty clear instruction as to what you should or shouldn't be doing if you want to be engaging in social distancing in a responsible manner. So yeah, that is that. I guess I will try to have a normal video out by next week, but I guess these days, you never know for sure. Take care out there.